Hey, Easy Jeezy here. It's a little cool this morning. Had some rain and hail last evening, and feels colder than it is. I wanted to do this video on some carburetor work here. Doesn't matter whether they're DeLordos or Webers, it's all basically the same principle here, and cars started running poorly. It was running fine. I completely went through the carburetors last winter. I was driving it a lot in the wintertime, and all kinds of weather, and getting the mag chloride was coming around the back of the engine compartment here and just really covering the carburetors. I got the license plate and the little cowling off, and it's just not enough to protect it. It just absolutely rusted away everything, and it started missing pretty bad. I kind of looked quick at the carbs, but I knew I better quit driving it in those conditions. That it's bad enough with the fuel, but now trying to get that salt and mag chloride off the outside, it's just not good for these, and it's not like you can replace this stuff easily. So what I've done is replaced brand new fresh linkage with new Heim joints. It's critical that you get these carburetors synchronized to lift off and be in the same position throughout their range. Everything's got to be tight. It's got to be tight up and down. What happens is these balls right here, they will actually wear down flat even if you put grease and lubrication on them. I've tried dry graphite. It just, dirt and sand, everything's exposed back here, and it grinds things down. You've got well, this one happens to be a steel shaft with a steel ball. I bought a replacement kit for it. It wasn't the same size as the shaft. On some of the earlier aluminum shafts that CB made, they put a steel sleeve in there, and you will wear through that. It's just bound to happen. Your foot moves around a lot. The Heims stay in pretty good shape. Let's see if I've got those laying on the bench here. Normally, I don't see them in the mess right now. Sorry about that, but if you're going to use an extra spring, for some reason this carburetor linkage was hanging up. I took it off the carb, everything was snapping closed, was nice and free, cleaned all the springs off, but you don't want to add springs to one carburetor or one side or any place on the linkage to try to help. When you see guys in these off-road cars, and I used to see it on sand rails a lot, they'd have these heavy springs attached to the frame. You had to mash the thing. It just ruins the carburetors. If you do have to put a spring, there's a Gene Berg linkage where he used a mechanism right in here. I'm going to call this a clock spring. It's the kind that winds around. It doesn't pull the shaft to one particular side. It just puts a rotational pressure to return it to the idle position. So with that in mind, I took a transmission pinion bearing locking tab, and to keep the heat away, I put a short spring here because I just needed a little bit more spring. I didn't think my cable was binding, but the angle is not perfect on the cable when it comes up. This is an old fan shroud, and it seems to have found a happy spot. It was dragging there for a while. I may take the spring off, or you can see where at some point myself or somebody has tried to realign the throttle tube. But just all that stuff, you want to get all the drag off of the throttle. So only push in the center, and you want to watch that lift. It's just barely a little bit of pressure. Check your other side, and it's got to lift exactly the same, and you will feel a little bit of play in there. You just have to keep working it. I use a pair of dividers, sheet metal dividers, and I will measure the distance from here, from the edge of the stand to the edge of this. You need to have the angle. If you look at this, the top of the rod goes it's just pointed in a little bit at the top. What I'm trying to do is improve the angle as it puts pressure down on that. You don't want weird angles. Ideally, it'd be nice if it was 90 degrees, but since this rotates, and you want to make sure that, okay, when you go to the full stop, that you've got the full stop on both sides, which I do. So the angles here, so that's sliding back and forth on this shaft, and the angles here, everything's got to be the same. And with all that effort, and it wasn't solving my problem. What I found is my accelerator pump squirters weren't squirting the way they should. Should have a nice straight stream going right down into the port, and I wasn't getting that. So I'm going to take this apart. I can't get at it from the sheet metal here. It's one of the drawbacks of having dual carbs. They're miserable to try to tune and work on with such little space. I've seen people put trap doors and drill holes, and on the Baja, that's probably I should just cut that out. It really made a mess in here. It's taken all the finish off my carburetors. Those things look nice and smooth and shiny with whatever came from the factory on them. And these carbs are like 20 years old, and they're my favorites. They're the 36 Delordos. But anyhow, let's take them apart. When you start seeing fuel lines, when you start seeing dirt caked up on the back of your carburetors, chances are you've got a worn seal, a fuel leak, the fuel's dribbling down here, and this is where your accelerator pump jet goes in here, your squirter, and I've been seeing a mess over here, so that tells me that something's leaking. I'm not getting the full pressure to squirt the fuel in. I'm leaking out someplace else, so that's part of the problem. Alright, I'll turn you back on. Okay, I've got it off the car, in the vise. I'm grabbing on the manifold. I'm being real sure that I don't have any tension on any linkage parts. The accelerator pump diaphragm area here is a trash can on this carburetor. It takes its fuel from the bottom of the fuel bowl, so any type of dirt, sediment, and crud, you can water, anything seems to lodge itself in here. It can create problems, but I want to find out what my float level is visually before I take this apart and leak all the fuel leaks out. So I'm just going to have to take the velocity stacks off the top section and go down from the top, so that I can remove the float assembly in the top of the carburetor, and I'll turn you back on. Okay, a little cluttered, a little messy around here. Try to clean up your area. I'm in a hurry to go get a burrito, so I'm not in the mood. Be real careful when you lift the top of the carburetor off. I think that gasket's got to come with it because of the way it curls around the float. Sorry about the shaky cam. This is real world stuff, and I should set up a tripod, but I got the car in the garage. There's no real room. Look at that float. That used to be shiny. This new fuel is attacking the hell out of everything. Now, see if I can do this without dropping all the screws. One-handed. Okay, now I'm gonna just go I'm running a little bit high, maybe a little bit high on the float level there. I don't know how that changed. Be real gentle with it. Let's look inside. I usually like it to be, the carburetor looks, I like it to be right where it is. This is what I call a shelf. Let me get a screwdriver to point with. Knock everything over. This is what I call the shelf area on a Delordo right here. And I like that fuel level to be right in there. That actually kind of looks low. Now, I should probably get something to stand on. But I'm going to operate the squirters. See, I've turned it. I'm turning it. Nothing's coming out. Oh, there it is. A little bit of a a little bit of a shot. See, that's what you want. But it's got to be there on the first time. Was not doing that in the car. What is going on? There's a little check valve under that screw at the bottom of the bowl. There's a ball that floats in there. I'm going to clean that. I'm going to take the front of this diaphragm cover off here and take a close look at all of that. I'll turn you back on. So far looking pretty good. Alright, be real careful when you take those screws out, and be sure and don't lose that spring. Now, like I told you, I had put a kit in previously, because a lot of times you'll see that this spring base will be all rusty, and I expected to see some junk in here. I'm not seeing it. You can see this dark stain that's where a bunch of fine sand was sitting, and I'm not seeing any of that. So, okay, take your brake cleaner, and there's holes up on the insides here. They come over to this cylinder, come up the shaft, go over to here, and come out. So be sure and check those out, and make sure that there's a seal underneath here. Make sure that that's in good shape. There's a spring inside of the very fine mesh spring. That's to keep, it's actually a filter to keep stuff from clogging the nozzle on your accelerator pump. The small stacks here are the idle jets on a Dell'Orto. The tall ones are your mains. I've already had those in and out, and we're just going through it here. Make sure everything's smooth. You can tell, see how that snaps back? That's what you want. You don't want to have all kinds of extra springs. You want to make sure that these things are free and that they do have tension to return it to idle position. Alright, I'm going to blow this out, put things back together, put it on the car, and doggone it, I was hoping I'd find something. I'll take out that check valve and check under that, but there's nothing mysterious about any of that. I thought I'd make a comment. I've mentioned this before in the past, but I'm just reassembling and it becomes real obvious. When you put your velocity stacks on the top, you don't have to run these things. They're supposed to improve the air. It's a performance thing. It looks cool and nobody can see it. You know it's underneath your air cleaners. But right in this area, a lot of people use the full-size stack as it comes in. And what happens is your air cleaner base, make sure that there's enough room here that your rubber on your air cleaner goes all the way down full and flat. I had to completely file these. These came roughed in when they were new, and what I also did was trimmed around the inside in this area here so that it's easier to get your jet stacks out, and of course your idle jets are down there in the bottom. And I use I don't use needle nose unless I don't have any other choice. I prefer to use what I call a split tail starter screwdriver, and it looks like this here, and it just, you know, you can spread it apart here, and that grabs your screw for lifting them in and out. But you know, it just makes life a whole lot easier and makes your air cleaner sit flat in the groove all the way around. Before I forget, I also wanted to stress, be careful when you're working with those compressed air and safety solvent, you know, brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner. I don't use carburetor cleaner as much as I used to. That stuff is too caustic. I use brake cleaner. It's cheaper, does as good a job, but I'm using a nice big fat cushy gasket here. Do not use those metal ones that come in the stock factory kit. There may be a one-shot deal for a stock setup, but when you have dual carbs, you're going to have these things on and off. Make sure that they're not torn. And I don't know what to say about that fuel being in there. You don't want to be washing your cylinders down. And I did put a new seat, needle and seat for the under the float to measure that. I'm using a fuel pressure regulator to drop the fuel pressure down. One thing I don't like and is using all these rubber hoses. The new fuels eat up hoses quick, and that's kind of like having a squeeze bulb full of pressure. A lot of times when you take your fuel line off, if you've got good float bowl seals, it'll squirt out, and that means that's good because your float is holding back the fuel from leaking in there overnight when you park it. So I may have another issue going on here I'm going to keep an eye on for sure. And just a little heads up for you, if you can run some steel brake line or something that's not so fat and flexible, because this is just fuel storage, and it's just like having a squeeze bulb, and even after you shut the car off, it's trying to push it back. If you have steel, you don't have that expansion and storage, and you might get a lot less of that fuel spillage inside there. I was playing with this last night too, with the engine off, and I think I demonstrated that's where that came from. When we started the video, we were looking at the linkage, and I was pushing down on the throttle. That's where that was. So the fuel pump was squirting that down. That's why that fuel is laying there in the bottom of those ports. Whew! I'm glad I remembered that. I was just about to start annoying myself with another goose chase. Anyhow, I'll keep you posted here. We'll keep going. These are a booger to put back on. I could probably start it into position. It's not all that hard. But what you gotta do, everything's happy. Don't lose that spring. You gotta have that spring. Both sides. Okay, let's go get that burrito. This car's got an electric fuel pump on it. The only reason is the case that came in it was a later fuel injected model with dual cadrons, and they don't machine out the fuel pump hole in the top of the case, so I just left it in there. Clean out some of that fuel that we shot in there, and see how she runs. It's a cool, humid morning, so but look at this. I don't know, 900, 800 RPM. Even a stock engine doesn't usually run that low. Most of them run up close to 1,000 or over. This is a built transmission with extra solid, real hard mount, so the transmission's a little noisy. First impression is it's already feeling better because it's cold-blooded, and if those accelerator pumps aren't working just fine, you'll know it. And what it does in this application with dual carbs is you'll be running better on 2 cylinders. Anytime you hear snapping and popping, especially on decelerate, or check your electrical, your ignition system, and a lean condition in your carburetor, those little idle jets are a lot smaller. Remember, in a stock single carb Solex, all your jetting is bigger because one carburetor is doing it all for 4 cylinders, and they don't get clogged up. That's why a lot of guys use them on off-road cars and stuff. But when you're running these dual Delordos or dual Webers, those jets, it's like having 4 different carburetors instead of 2. Each cylinder's got its own idle jet, its own main jet, and they're a lot more sensitive to fouling. Feels pretty good. Well, hope you have a great day. I'm going to start getting a little better about putting out my videos, get back in the groove here.